Games most often fall into one of three categories. The first is the most obvious, a game which is good or great in nearly every aspect. Think Batman Arkham City or The Witcher 3. The second category involves games that are firmly split down the middle. That is a game where one aspect is great but another is markedly less than great and contains an otherwise fine experience. Sometimes these less than great aspects aren't even necessarily tied towards the gameplay or game itself. Sometimes it comes down to marketing or greedy publishers. Dead Space 3 and Dragon Age 2 come to mind, which I'm well aware both are EA born and bred. The third and last category sees games that are just bad. Maybe there was some potential there, but for one reason or another the titles are forever tainted by whatever plagued them. Take 2014's Dungeon Keeper and Aliens Colonial Marines, for example. To be fair, a game can also change categories through any number of factors as well. No Man's Sky had a less than stellar release, but after years of hard work it's much better than it once was. Furthermore, there can be certain expectations tied to a game based on the genre or subgenre that it's in. Every ARPG dungeon crawler to release after Diablo 2 has been compared to it, and every CRPG ends up compared to either Baldur's Gate or Planescape Torment. Fel Seal Arbiter's Mark, made by Six Eye Studio and released for Switch, PS4, Xbox One, Windows, Linux, and Mac, of all things, is one that falls neatly into that second category and due to its genre ends up being compared to the greats of its kind, nearly hitting the mark in the story department and wholly excelling in its combat, especially its version of multiclassing. Outside of its combat and aforementioned multiclassing, I don't really find it that memorable, which is a shame. There's some concepts that could be toyed with and are, but not to an extent I would really like for them to, and most aren't. There's potential setup for a good amount, but no execution for that setup. The story follows a group of people led by Kyrie, an Arbiter, in her pilgrimage. That's the bare bones of it. The less bare bones version is as follows. Kyrie is an Arbiter captain. The Arbiters are a kind of police force working directly under the Immortals, a small group of especially powerful beings that rule over Tiora. Under her leadership is Reiner, her adopted brother and fellow Arbiter, and Anadine, an Arbiter in training. The game opens with these three coming across Alphonse, your bog-standard noble asshole you've likely come to expect in games such as these, killing someone and attempting to kill Kyrie upon his discovery. Naturally, he fails, and after you help him reach his new homie jail cell, the Immortals call a meeting with the Arbiters, and it's revealed that one of the Immortals, Primus, one of the eldest, is stepping down, and they're choosing potential candidates to take his place. These candidates, called marked due to the visible marks on their body as a result of being chosen by an Immortal, must embark on a pilgrimage across Tiora to visit various temples which house relics, which a marked then must interact with. After leaving the meeting, it's revealed that Alphonse was let out of his cell, and is now a marked. Shortly afterward, Kyrie herself is made a marked because another Immortal, Quintus, believes something is wrong and Kyrie is likely the best bet for getting to the bottom of it by having her, well known for her sense of justice because yes of course, potentially become an Immortal among other things. There you go. It gets even more complicated later on, but that's spoilers, and for the faults I feel the game's story has, I'm still not going to spoil it for you, yet. There's somewhere between reaching these temples and the mystery of what's occurring that Alphonse could be considered a marked, you'll have to fight. These fights are where the game truly shines, these combat encounters, through a mixture of its relatively basic combat system and the significantly more robust interactions therein. I'm talking of course about multiclassing. Every character has a main class as well as a subclass. You unlock more skills, both passive and active, in a class's skill tree via AP, which is gained by doing various tasks. For the most part, you'll likely be gaining AP through combat and missions. In combat, every character, including those out of combat, gain a small amount of AP for their main class. I should specify, every character gains AP for the main classes that are used in combat. A Gadgeteer won't get AP for their class if there are none in combat, but will get some AP towards the Knight class if there's a Knight in combat. You gain more AP as you use skills for that class, and at the end of combat, sometimes a character can be awarded with MVP, which increases how much they've earned by about 30%. You have access to every passive and active ability for your main class while it's equipped. However, you only have access to the subclass's active abilities while it's equipped, and can choose 2 passives and 1 counter to equip from all passives and counters you've unlocked from all classes for that specific character. This is great. Making a Gunner Knight with dual wield and leech life alongside critical quicken can make a theoretically unkillable monster. The Knight has an active skill called One for All. It immediately ends that unit's turn, but it also means that if any allied unit uses a basic attack within the attack range of the Gunner, which is, pretty long on account of the guns, the Gunner also attacks that same target 2 times on account of the dual wield passive until its next turn, which makes slow potentially a good debuff to have. Plus, with Critical Quicken, unless they get killed with a single high damage attack, they get an immediate turn when their health reaches a certain threshold, and can promptly attack again and heal up a good deal because they can still attack twice in their turn via dual wield, and Leash Life still applies for both of those attacks. The Gunner War Mage is also great, giving a unit a potential spell range further than almost all spellcasters, even with buffs that increase their spell range via equipment. Plus, with dual wield again and the Infused Edge ability, you can deal damage 3 times in a single turn while potentially exploiting most elemental weaknesses. Lich Sorcerer with Life Font and Economy. The Lich has a passive that makes it so magic costs life instead of mana. Life Font gives the unit life based on how much they walk, and Economy lowers the cost of spells by a third. All of the Sorcerer's magical abilities deal damage to every single enemy on the battlefield, with an increase based on proximity from the casting unit. And Void Storm, one of their later abilities, doesn't have the potential to have less damage due to elemental defenses. You just have to make sure you take a walk after consuming the world in a void. This also allows you to make the most use out of the Mystic Shield counter, since you aren't using your MP anyways. There are some things that don't work as well, though. Drowning is a mechanic. If a character gets moved into water, whether by being pushed or teleported inside of it and can't swim, they just die. Normally I'd be annoyed by a mechanic like this, but since it's something that goes both ways, I'm cool with it. However, I mentioned teleporting. Yeah, it's not as fair. So far as I can recall, only select enemies have access to using teleportation as an ability, but they can still use it and will use it to their advantage. Someone's not going home today. There's also an annoying ability that occurred exactly once, called Interstitch. It was a memorable once, otherwise I wouldn't bring it up. This is literally telefragging. I'm appreciative that they turned it into an ability, less that it's one you don't have access to, and much less that it's an ability you can't counter in any way once you're in range of it. I mean, you could technically keep draining the MP of the boss who has the ability, but he also has a drain MP counter, so... Also, there are some strange choices as it relates to environmental traits. There's your obvious elemental weaknesses and status effects, silence always being annoying, as well as directional advantages, dealing more damage from behind or on either side of your target, but height advantage, something that increases your damage based on your height relative to your target, is a passive ability that you have to unlock. Traps can literally negate the rest of your turn, even if they miss. That's kinda garbage. I understand if they did so when they hit, but if they missed, that shouldn't be the case. It didn't do anything. Why am I losing my turn? In one story-related instance, I've got 2 ranged characters on a roof, only one can attack from it. I don't know, maybe this has something to do with the fact that one of them is using a crossbow and the other one's using a longbow, but it's still weird. I'll chalk it up to a bug. Inclines can effectively negate melee attacks and skills. I get the sense that the game registers said incline as being a good deal higher or lower than the adjacent incline that I'm trying to attack from, or even doesn't register that it is an incline at all, but it is. I can clearly see that I should very much be able to attack here, but no, I can't. You doubly can't attack large enemies from a differing height, even though again, it looks like you should be able to do so due to their large size. The leveling system itself is also interesting in that it goes 2 separate but interconnected ways. So far as I can tell, you level your class with AP, which is spent to unlock abilities tied to the class. Your character's level, however, increases through experience, but which stats increase is dependent on what class they have at that time. Their main class, similar to what Dragon's Dogma does, but without the much more limited options for class. On the one hand, it's difficult to mess up a build because one level in a class that you didn't want is only a big deal for the most devout of min-maxers. On the other hand, trying to level up a certain class for a character forces you to spend those potential levels because you'll mostly be earning AP through combat, which you'll also gain experience for with a class that you might not want to have the stats from in the long run. That is, for more than just one level. I say that combat's the main way to gain AP and experience because another way to gain either is missions, timed events that take place in the background of everything. Apart from choosing who to send on these missions, you don't interact with them at all. They garner various rewards. Components, yes, there's crafting by the way, items, equipment, gold, AP experience, new missions, new classes, and new outfit hunts, which are special combat encounters, arenas which unlock after you complete all of the missions in a given region, and IP or influence points. IP is gained after combat from various missions and is used to upgrade the guild where you choose to take missions. These upgrades can affect a few things in the guild's region, but mostly they affect patrols, the free roam combat encounters that you can take after clearing a spot on the map, and missions. One of the ones I always take is the Marina upgrade, which means that all of my characters can swim while on patrol in that specific region. Immensely useful, even though I didn't really go on patrol that often. Important to note, these missions take place in the background even if the game is closed, which suggests that they base their timing more on your system's clock than anything else, which further suggests that with some clock tinkering you can cheese it. Don't quote me on that though, it's not something I've done myself. To be fair, you might not have missions, I probably should have led with that. They're found in the Missions and Monsters DLC, which adds in these guilds and missions as well as those things tied to them. It also adds in some new classes, equipment, crafting recipes, locations, music, and most notably, the ability to tame monsters and have them join your party via the new Wrangler class. As DLCs go, it's fairly good, it ties into the game well enough that you might not even notice that it's actually DLC, it feels natural. Something else that feels nice is the difficulty settings. A lot of games just have a very easy to very hard scale or slider that you have to choose from. And while this game does have presets, it goes beyond them. It has a list of variables that you can modify at any time outside of combat, and affects more than just life and damage numbers. It can affect the amount of equipment enemies have, whether or not they can use items, and how often they do so if they can, to name a few things. A nice touch is that changing these options doesn't disable the achievements. The story, however, is disappointing. These Immortals are immortal only in how long they live, not in being unkillable. They can still get killed. There's plenty you can do there, but they don't. The Kawas are an entire people that don't really get elaborated on beyond the Elders. The same can be said of the Zil, another entire people, both of whom's entire interactions can best be described as either exposition or MacGuffin. That's it. I mean, yeah, there's Zara, who's technically a Zil, but the only character traits he really has are A, he likes Reiner's cooking, B, he's an Arbiter, and C, that's it, that's all. There's even a character introduction for a villain reveal later in the game, and he's name-dropped as if he's someone you should already know about. You fight this guy 3 times, even double check the wiki to be sure, but there's no setup for that initial reveal. There's an obvious plot twist as well, and what feels like a cop-out for something related to the plot twist. Look, in order for me to elaborate any further, I'm going to need to talk about spoilers, so if you want to avoid that, you should head here. Immortals. Long-lived and very powerful, and, as it turns out, this is because each Immortal contains and restrains a portion of the Maw. Primus, that guy who stepped down and started the pilgrimage, did so entirely so he could gain access to the temples and absorb the remaining portions of that power. Also, Sigil, an anti-immortal rebellion group that I have not mentioned until this point, answered to him, but only because Rafe and Grimeye, the leader and right hand of Sigil respectively, intend to pull the Maw out of Primus and use it to kill the other Immortals. Firstly, Primus being a traitor was painfully obvious from the moment he took the relic from Kyrie and told her to focus on the pilgrimage. It's also weird that Kyrie didn't consider at all that Primus could have been lying, especially given that Quintus, the person who made her marked, was like, hey, the possibility of an Immortal being behind the strange stuff is very real. Alphonse, the guy who kicked this entire plot off, was made a marked, something that can only be done by an Immortal. She's just not suspicious at all. Septimus, super evil, right off the bat. The only way he could give off any more villain vibes is if he had a glowing sign over his head saying, hey, I'm leading the corrupt arbiters that helped those bandits you stop from raiding the city. Turns out he was working with Primus too, as shocking as that is, alongside Secunda, another Immortal, one whose existence I honestly completely forgot about. Sorry, major digression. Point is, Primus is an Immortal. He's old, like very, very old, but he succumbs to the corrupting influence of the Maw. There can be plenty to toy with when it comes to immortality. How to deal with knowing that everyone you know and love will die long before you. How knowing that changes your interactions with people in general. What goals you've gained and lost due to this newfound longevity of life. The effects that living so long can have on, among other things, your memory. Or even how lonely one must feel knowing that there is so few like you with the same level of, quote, immortality, unquote, in the world, but instead, they just go with the trope of he's gone mad, and do so by using a this evil thing is corrupting him cop-out. It's not even him that's the problem. To be fair, I can't say for certain that was the intent, using the Maw as a means to justify his eventual and inevitable betrayal, but still. Another weird thing, Rafe lowers his hood and reveals himself to be Clyde. I didn't know who the fuck Clyde was until this moment, where he's revealed to be Clyde. Apparently, he was an Arbiter alongside Anadine's mother. He wasn't mentioned at all until this point, and after his death scene, is never mentioned again. You could have had him be literally anyone else and have fundamentally the same effects. And the Maw, big bad end guy, requires a sacrifice to be beaten, at least in the regular ending. Saw that coming too, and Reiner choosing to sacrifice himself was likewise predictable. My issue is that the Maw is bringing his reality into Teora, literally changing the landscape, physically altering the world. Are you getting the picture? All you get is 2 new enemies in that final combat, which takes place in a location overrun with that physical alteration. A tentacle and the Maw itself. That is it. Everything else you've seen before, despite that. This otherworld being of the world is physically changing Teora to more closely resemble this reality. That's all you get. That's all there is to it. Stop him. There is so much potentially interesting things that just don't get expanded or elaborated on. Reiner's wife died, and Yates brought her back as a cadaver under his control because he is a necromantic doctor. Okay, who was his wife? What did she do? Her name was Alicia. That's it. Okay, Yates. Necromantic doctor. How does he know how to do that? Who trained him? Because that's something weird and something incredible if you were able to do that entirely on your own. He traveled in Nakawa's land to study, that's it. Anadine's mother was an Arbiter. How could this affect her growing up, or could it have potentially tainted her view of the Immortals or Arbiters? Also, when it's later revealed that the Immortals had effectively sent her to her death, how does she react to that? To the first, it instilled in her the want to become one herself. To the second, she doesn't. That's it. Kyrie is an Arbiter with a strong sense of justice and firm understanding of the law. How do her ideals clash with her loyalty, especially when it's revealed that some of those she's sworn her fealty to are almost comedically evil? They don't, that's it. Zaro, I've already talked about him. Katya is a bounty hunter and Sigil member. How does she react upon learning that the leader of Sigil is summoning demons for his cause and later is revealed to be working with an immortal whom Sigil has sworn to overthrow? She leaves and joins Kyrie. Well, I say joins, it's more like Kyrie conscripted her, but either way, that's it. Quintus, Septimus, Secunda, Tertia, all immortals alongside Primus, all just as long-lived and capable of succumbing to the Maw. How do they react when Primus assaults the last temple? Some join him, some don't. It's also revealed that Septimus has been doing this since, I guess, the start, maybe. That's it. There's another mortal who's just dead in that combat, by the way. I completely forgot about Secunda and Tertia until this point, but at least they both did something. Rest in peace, guy on the ground. Let's talk about something tangentially related. There are multiple endings tied to finding a potentially missable character to add to your party. I didn't know about it until after the fact, which isn't something I like. Having an ending hidden behind something a player can potentially entirely miss through no fault of their own, as opposed to it being a choice they can make in the game through either a dialogue or something akin to it, and only finding out about it after the fact via a Google search? No thanks. Don't get me wrong, I immensely enjoyed the gameplay, especially the combat, but I don't think I'm gonna go through another 30 hours or more, considering the cavalcade of side content available to do, to see the other ending, if I'm being honest. I heard for a good bit about the story, but almost all of my complaints are just about wasted potential. If I'm being honest, it works well enough to facilitate the combat and gameplay that it's meant to complement. And that's enough, especially because the combat is as varied and customizable as it is. Moving on to music, because it's something else to consider. Most of it's good. It does the job, at least. It's not bad, it's not great. You'd be hard-pressed to find something truly unique in it, though, and some of them are kind of mismatched. During some cutscenes, it still plays that regular conversation music, even though something is definitely wrong. The only song I can say that truly stood out was the combat music against the final boss, because it was noticeably different. Ultimately, Fel Seal Arbiter's Mark is a good game carried mostly by its combat and the class system that makes the most use out of it, though it can be daunting if you want a more simplified take on the strategy of strategy RPG. The story, while predictable, does do the job, and the game itself could potentially scratch an SRPG itch if you can look past it, or wait until November. Story out.